I'm representing a buyer on a potential deal here, and the business has been listed for a while, but they just opened a new location, and obviously the price is going up as a result. But we only have about a week worth of sales data to look at for this new location. Do you guys have any insight on anything that would pertain to a new location and kind of vetting the overall, viability and profitability of a newer location?
Well, I'm curious if they're selling a business, why they would open another location in the middle of trying to sell. I mean, that's just not smart. That's like I had a manufacturer one time and we were trying to sell his manufacturing was aerospace work that he was doing, and he bought a $200,000 machine.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't buy it, actually, he leased it. So all of a sudden he had this big lease payment. He didn't need it. He had plenty of equipment to do all the work he was doing, but his accountant told him he needed more expenses to depreciate or something. I don't know. Actually, he would have just expensed out the lease payment. So anyhow, so now we had a 200, we're trying to sell this business for 500, 600,000. I forget the exact price. And now there's a $200,000 liability that's got to be paid off at escrow because a buyer's not going to take that over. So sometimes these sellers, it's like, well, wait a second. Why are you opening a new location when you're in the middle of trying to sell the business? And what if a buyer doesn't want two locations? I mean, you could have a buyer that comes in, wants an established business. Most buyers do want established businesses, or at least the buyers that we're targeting, right? Typically are looking for cash flow, typically are looking for existing businesses because they don't have a startup mindset. So now you're in a position where you've got to have somebody who is willing to buy an existing business with a startup on the side, and it's kind of an interesting mix and match there. So definitely complicate your sale. Do you have buyers that have looked at it at this point?
Yeah, we just looked at it last week. So, yeah, it's all brand new, and I'm just trying to figure out, because obviously the price is going up pretty significantly with it, to reflect the new store location. I'm just, I'm a little anxious about, the price increase with no real numbers to look at,
Yeah. And most buyers that buy cash flow, which is what we're selling, are not going to pay for leasehold improvements, which is what you have in your second location.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be a lot of buyers that just look at that and say, well, the cash flow that is here is not supporting your new price that you're, because they've had all these new expenses in this build out. If they did, you're going to need to have probably a track record of some cash. So it may be that it just ends up extending your sale, that it just takes longer to find a buyer who's willing to, because they want to see a track record of some cash flow. So it could be that the buyers looking at it are going to say, well, I'm willing to buy this one, I don't really want that one. Or they'll just say, hey, I'll come back in 6 months after you've been in business for a while and see what the numbers look like. But right now the price isn't warranted based on the cash flow that's being generated that I can see. So you've got, different buyers are going to look at that in different ways. But it was a curious decision on the part of the sellers to do that. I mean, how long have they been attempting to sell the business?
It's been probably listed for about a year now.
It's been listed for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's curious. How far away is the second location?
The two locations are probably about an hour and a half apart.
Okay. Are they willing to sell the existing location, the cash flows, without selling the other one and let
it's
grow
very
for a while?
complicated in a cannabis transaction because you can't legally, separate assets like that, on this certain transaction. So it's kind of like all or nothing with these kind of transactions. The new location is in a very highly sought after area, but it's a area that is notorious for, tourism. So, I'm just trying to exercise some caution with seeing 1 week worth of data in the peak of tourism versus what does like the 12-month actual outlook look like
Yeah.
for business, so just trying to figure out how to best reconcile that for my
Yeah.
client.
No, and your buyers are going to be doing the same thing.
Mhm.
Buyers are going to be doing the exactly the same thing. So, yeah,
How can,
that's a tough one.
how can you contribute much value to it when it doesn't have a history? When we do all of our calculations, we're looking at history.
Mhm.
If this doesn't have history, how can you say, oh yeah, it's great and it's in this wonderful location? Oh, all of a sudden we're gonna tack on X hundred thousands of dollars to it. How is that viable?
Yeah, I mean that's my big question as well. Again, I'm representing the buyer on this one, so I'm trying to figure out because the asking price went up by $700,000 as a result.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, my answer is that it's beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So
Mhm.
if the buyer likes the business, the buyer is gonna, if they're smart, have their own pro forma, making their own assumptions
Mhm.
about what their growth trajectory and their profitability is going to be. And any buyer that doesn't do that probably should not be buying, right?
Yeah.
But you can't just rely on what the seller's experience because you don't have any history. But somebody's gonna have to make some assumptions about what is the season. I sold I got a guy into a lease in a bar, and he would have his rents fluctuating every month, but based on whether it was high season or low season at a ski resort. And he got the landlord to agree to that, and it allowed him to get through, the cash flow variations of his restaurant or bar operation. So, sometimes you got to be a little more creative and help. You don't want to be the one that's telling them, "Here's your pro forma," because you can get in big trouble if you give somebody a pro forma and it doesn't work out the way you thought it might. But you can tell them they really need it, and maybe again they need a business consultant to do a competent one, but they really need to have the fire in their belly that this is going to work out for them, and then they can overpay for it.
Hey,
Mhm.
Myles, does the second location, does it include the real estate, or is it just are
No,
they
it's not. So it's actually an operator's agreement. So it's a profit split. I think the owner of the company and the owner of the licenses gets 60% of I believe net. And so they do a 60-40 split on it. The thing is this is such a it's in a so to kind of give you guys a reference point, this new location is literally right outside of one of the main entrances to Yellowstone National Park. It is one of the biggest, tourism destinations in the state, if not the entire United States. And so I can understand the idea of wanting to tack a lot of money on with value because but I'm so anxious about walking into something that only really has 1 week worth of sales data to look at, especially knowing that tourism is very seasonal out here.
Yeah.
And so I want to be able to inform my buyer that you have to prepare for what does the winter look like out here when there's not tourists climbing all over the place. So it's just trying to figure out how best to really approach the situation with no data really to look at.
Yeah, maybe one of the ways you could do that would be to have the seller provide monthly P&Ls or a P&L by month for the
Mhm.
existing location. Okay. To show what seasonality there is there, if any, even though it's different location and all that, but it might give you some indication of months have higher revenue versus lower revenue. And, and I mean, it would be a start, and then you just put waivers and disclaimers all over the place in every communication with your buyer saying, look at, here's some of the data for the existing location that you can't necessarily impute those results over to the new location because it's an hour and a half away, different scenario. We don't have any data, but at least it might give you some type of a basis or, you know.
Yeah, it's really tough because the new location is right on like a main drag, whereas the original location is kind of off the beaten path a little bit,
Yeah.
you know. So there's so many variables as I'm kind of looking into this, you know. So I really do appreciate all of the advice you guys have offered. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, of course. Hey, Diane, I see you got your hand up and I want to get this. I got to go to another meeting real quickly. That's starting
okay.
right now, but I do want to answer your question first. So go ahead,
And
Diane.
just I want to ask a quick question on your advice. You mentioned the buyer would not want to buy improvement. How come? The buyer, you said the buyer just want only the cash flow. I thought the improvement is important because when they set up a business, they need to have own equipment, everything.
Right. So it's the difference between somebody who has a startup mentality and somebody versus somebody who's buying an existing business. And they're two different target markets, because somebody who has a startup mentality, they know they're going to lease a space, especially in the franchise world. Think about it. They're going to pay for a franchise agreement, lease a space, have to build it out to the franchisor's specifications. They're probably going to have $200,000 to $300,000 or more out of pocket before they can even open the doors to start. Somebody buying that same type of franchise as an existing business is going to buy it based on the cash flow. And so that's why you see scenarios where, you know, years ago you had these Quiznos subs, and people were paying $300, $325 to build them out, get the doors open, and then you would see them out on Biz Buy Sell all day long for 40 to 60 grand because they weren't making any money. Typically the franchisee would either run out of money before he could start marketing and start bringing people in the door, or he was bringing people in the door, but just wasn't generating sufficient cash flow. And so when you value a business based on the cash flow, it was only worth 60,000. And so people buying the existing businesses were not willing to pay for that whole franchise build out and everything else. It was like, no, I want cash flow from day one. If I was willing to spend that 300 grand, I'd go to the franchise, find a new location that I think was a better location, and build it out myself. So it's a different mentality.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys
Thank you.
all for your participation.